This is episode 358 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Lynne Andersen. She is the president, outgoing, of the NAIOP chapter here in the city of Albuquerque. That is the National Association.
No,
Oh,
stop right there.
dang it.
Used to be.
Oh, okay. Well, then you tell me, what are you president of, Lynn?
It's still NAIOP, but NAIOP doesn't mean anything anymore.
Oh,
It's an acronym.
well, there you go.
And so now it means NAIOP, Commercial Real Estate Development Association.
All right. Well, we'll go with it, and that is important information already out of the chute. Well, Lynn, I'll just start by saying that when I started at the Rio Grande Foundation a little over 15 years ago, you were one of the first people that I met or interacted with and heard about because of your leadership in New Mexico and especially more local public policy efforts. And you are now on the verge of retirement. So this is in some ways an exit interview where we get to talk about all the things you've done, but also the future of New Mexico and Albuquerque's economy. And I just really appreciate your coming in today and talking with us and just sharing your knowledge and wisdom of 26 years of work in local public policy and other things. So it's great.
Well, I'm delighted to be here today and hopefully can provide some of that information to you and make it interesting.
Now, when you started with NAIOP, which doesn't mean anything anymore, we got that out of the way. Had you been living in New Mexico? Were you involved in politics or policy before that? Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this effort.
If I can, let me start back to why I'm in New Mexico.
Okay.
Because I was an Air Force brat. And like all Air Force families, we moved about every 3 years. And there were bases all over the country that I lived in for 3 years. But the year that I was in 8th grade, my dad was in special weapons. He was a colonel in the Air Force. And we ended up in Roswell for a little bit. But before that, it was Louisiana, California, New Mexico, and Indiana, the same year that we all study state history. So I got a little bit of everything. But I always remembered New Mexico, and I remembered particularly coming up through the canyon into Albuquerque, and it just stuck in my mind. So when I had been teaching in Spain for a couple of years, and when I came back to the States, I sort of wanted to be back in a Hispanic environment because I was very comfortable in that world. It's a beautiful world. And I just thought, hey, maybe it's time. So I hitchhiked out. I was going to Taos. It was the 70s.
All right.
And I was going to Taos. And when I got to Santa Fe, I looked around and said, if Taos is smaller, I will never find a job. So I settled in Santa Fe for a while and worked for what was then one of the largest advertising agencies in Santa Fe, and who had, via government money, state money, all of the various tourism dollars that the legislature had allocated to different entities, municipal entities, but also associations around the state. So I could walk up eventually to one of those racks in hotels and motels that had the flyers about various things, and I had written every one of them. And
Okay.
so I got to visit all those places. The southern part of the state, Las Cruces, Carlsbad, the eastern part of the state, the northern particularly. I was the marketing director through that for Ski New Mexico and other kinds of entities. And it just gave me such a wonderful sense of knowing New Mexico after about 3 years and traveling to all those places and making all those friends. The Gallup annual Indian shows and things that they did, and just all across the state. And so I actually then went to work for state government, but I'm not really comfortable in government. And after about a year, I left and went to work with a new company that was doing a statewide magazine, and on business. And I became the publisher eventually. And then when I left there, I did in-flight magazines all over the West. And so I was very much involved in publishing. And I had been doing, as part of my publishing company's rules and regs, the magazine for NAIOP. And that was the way they were starting to make money to build an association. So when I decided that I was not going to do anything for a couple of years because I had a beautiful 6-year-old son and wanted to see him grow up instead of being on an airplane daily, they came to me and said, would I take over being the, at that point, executive director of NAIOP. It would only be 2 hours a day, and they would just see how things developed. Of course, it grew like Topsy, but I had a non-compete for a couple of years and just really worked part-time for them. But once that 2-year non-compete clause was gone with my publishing company, then I took the magazine back, and that's what paid for my salary to then work full-time for the association.
Wow.
And it grew from there.
So that is fascinating, given how ubiquitous you are and have been throughout my career at the Rio Grande Foundation, and what a high-profile role you've played in public policy issues, and you have your meetings and all kinds of stuff. The fact that you kind of got your start on a part-time basis is fascinating. So that's one of the things I wanted to find out from you is NAIOP as an institution. It's across the country. It deals with office properties and kind of the commercial real estate world. Is this New Mexico chapter unique? And if so, is it because of you, without putting too fine a point on it? Or is there something else that has pushed this institution to have a higher profile role? Because, in other cities, other states, chambers of commerce and certain industrial groups tend to be the most high profile. As I understand it, not having surveyed every city across the entire country, but NAIOP has a specific and unique high-profile role here in Albuquerque. Is that the Lynne Andersen effect?
Well, it's that because they got a full-time person,
Right.
and that always helps. And then I was eventually able to bring in a couple of people to help with that process as well. One being my husband, John Gallegos, the other being a part-time person, Rosie Yee, who is incredible in her own right as office manager. But the interesting thing about NAIOP, first of all, it did used to be the National Association of Industrial and Office Parks. It grew from there when the industry grew, because like New Mexico in many ways, people that are developers, and this is a developer organization, and developer is often a dirty word these days, but it is the people that actually make buildings happen. It needed to begin to understand the national group that our fingers, or their fingers, were in a lot of pies. So it wasn't just office and industrial. It was retail, multifamily, mixed use, across the board office, if I didn't mention that. And it really meant that those people pulled a lot of that together as well. So it's why you see so many mixed-use developments now. There are office buildings with multifamily on the upper floors. There are shopping centers that are open and involve even medical, as you're seeing over at some of our open retail situations where they've incorporated urgent care centers or other kinds of labs into the shopping adventure. But the bottom line to me was that it was a very large group in New Mexico of entrepreneurial, predominantly small business, because there are developers in NAIOP nationally and in Canada and in Mexico. There are connections across both of those borders with NAIOP here. And it really was just a fascinating group of people, because it really does impact all of us, what they do. So if you're, and NAIOP is different from other organizations because it's not like the Brokers Association. It's not like the Bankers Association. It's not the Contractors Association. It's everybody who touches commercial real estate. And commercial anymore is just defined much wider.
Yeah.
Multifamily is now not residential. It's a commercial undertaking.
Okay. So your organization, and by extension then you, have been involved in a lot of core economic issues facing, certainly, you're more focused locally in Albuquerque. Are you focused elsewhere around the state, or do you consider yourself mostly an Albuquerque metro-based organization?
We are officially the state NAIOP chapter, but it's clear that it's based in Albuquerque, but it's also based in Rio Rancho very strongly. We have monthly roundtable breakfasts there. We have other members around the state. But, New Mexico's big. I had Las Cruces members for a while, but, this was before Zoom. They could drive, have to drive 4 or 5 hours just to come to a meeting. It just didn't work. I had people on the east side. And slowly that sort of went away as other associations developed in those communities that addressed some of those same issues, and that was fair enough. We tried for many years to establish an outreach to Santa Fe, but it's a different kind of culture there in terms of what happens to NAIOP New Mexico. NAIOP New Mexico, when the members sit around the table, they're sitting around the table to discuss what's best for the chapter and what's best for the economy, what's best for New Mexico. They don't really get into a lot of competitive kind of discussions at those events. They're competitors, absolutely. They go against each other all the time on bids and on various activities. But in terms of the chapter itself, it's a pretty cohesive group that are there and on the same wavelength of what's going to be good for all of them in terms of business successes.
Okay. So by 26 years, you've been involved in NAIOP, and that means we're talking about approximately 1995 when you got started. So talk about some of the big changes that you've seen in politics in New Mexico, local government, whatever. We can talk about some of the specific struggles going on right now and what your organization's tried to do and maybe how we see the future evolving. But let's go down memory lane a little bit, talk about the evolution of this area. Any big, broad points that you kind of see in terms of where New Mexico has been and the local area has been as well?
Sure. We're actually, for the amount of population, we're a medium chapter in NAIOP's ratings. And in many cases, there will be 6 or 7 associations in a state California has, I think, 5 or 6. Florida has 4 or 5, and they're all based in their larger cities. So initially, yes, it strictly was Albuquerque, and even though it was the state organization. So it started with, when I started, there were, I think, less than 60 members. And when we had events, there would be 20 members because some of those 60s were from other parts of the state and getting involved with things. So it really was, it needed to be looked at in terms of what did they need from NAIOP? What was going to make this association worth joining? And at that point, it strictly was local politics. Mm-hmm. There was very little involvement at the national level in the kinds of regulations and laws and political activity that was happening that would directly affect the business of the developers, the architects, the engineers, the contractors, the land use attorneys, the other kinds of entities that professional entities that are involved in what makes a commercial project happen. So I concentrated almost entirely on working with local city councilors and county commissioners at Bernalillo County in talking about how we could get approvals fast-tracked, of working with what the regulations were. At that point, you saw the beginning of impact fees, which was a brand new system and was almost the first impact rates that were set in place were so high that at a national convention of people who actually were advisors to different cities and communities on impact fee regulations, how you set them up, how you decided how much they were. The group that had worked with Albuquerque was told that they had expanded the envelope so far there was no longer any envelope. And so eventually the city backed off
What
of that.
era are we talking about on that?
We're probably talking the early 2000s.
Okay.
So it was just a brand new era in the whole world of how do we work with developers, because the industry was growing, people were doing more and more kinds of things, and suddenly cities got more and more involved in, well, for instance, if you remember Rusk, that's when the neighborhood associations came in, and they got stronger and stronger and stronger, and now are a major part of approvals for a lot of development.
And an obstacle, quite frankly, to a lot of development.
Absolutely, they can be an obstacle, and it's the frustrating thing for the industry, and that's been a fight as well. When we got behind the IDOs, the
IDO means
means I'm so used to that is the integrated development ordinance.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to simplify things, but every year we change the IDO, and every year neighborhood groups get involved as well. And I understand that. I'm the president of my HOA. So I understand when Smith wants to put another gas station across the street. It's it impacts everybody in that area. But what often happens is that there is so much power on the neighborhood side that there's no predictability. Mm-hmm. And if there's no predictability in the rules and regulations, then you aren't able to predict what it's going to cost you to build this building, because you may be held up for 6 months. Right. You may be held up in Santa Fe. There's one developer that I'm working with. he has not been able to get approval for 9 years.
Now, would you say that Albuquerque has become a better, easier place to do business since you got your start? About the same? I mean, it is a Democrat-run city. Most major American cities are, of course, but the political philosophies change. I mean, we had Mayor Barry in as mayor for a while as well. Would you say the overall shift has made your job and your organization's jobs more difficult? Have other factors played a role? Obviously, you hear talk of there's a lack of land available for some major projects. How do you see the city as a whole evolving over the last 2 decades and a half?
Well, it's been an interesting ride in terms of that
Yeah.
because there is always been a pushback from the city on who do they work with? Do they work with the neighborhoods or do they work with the business? And I think that's not only just Albuquerque. I think that's across the state because there is a distrust of business in New Mexico culture, I think. And it's this sense of I don't trust this guy from the neighbors because their neighborhood is very important to them. There's historic neighborhoods in this city that don't want any new multifamily homes and high rises, even though one of our hardest problems is providing homes for people with some sort of leeway on density. Well, nobody wants density, because it's high rises. But what are you going to do with kids that can't buy homes or can't buy condos
Yeah.
or
Well,
can't rent? I mean, the rents have gone up exponentially
yeah. Well, I can
since.
tell you, my mom is a renter, and when she was presented with what it's going to cost her next year, there was definitely an element of sticker shock for her in that project. And yeah, it is. It's a tough problem, and boy, you really get into these nitty gritty issues that cross partisan lines in a lot of ways because as conservatives, you don't necessarily, we're not Washington, D.C., we're not New York City. You're not going to have massive high rises all over our town. I think it's safe to say that downtown is underutilized, and we really need a lot of work. And I know I interrupted you, so I want to continue your thought, but it also
No, that's
seems
fine.
like the crime issue holds us back from actually developing in a lot of ways because the moment you put density in, people think, oh, crime's going to follow, and they're not wrong about that.
Well, I don't think it's necessarily crime will follow. I think it's cars will follow. Where are you going to park everybody?
True.
Because we're still doing that. And so, do residential streets suddenly have rows of cars who don't live there
Right.
up and down their neighborhoods, but there's no place else? It becomes, you're right, it's a real hard question to answer in terms of that. And it's something that developers have been looking at. How do we meld these two? Do we build underground? Well, that's not necessarily a good idea downtown because you hit water pretty quick. But the options out there are tough, and the elected officials, they're really having to walk a tightrope because even if they are very pro-business, they are still elected by the people in their district, and their district the districts have grown by having more power as neighborhood associations, just simply because their voices are heard, and they should be. No one's saying any other way. But if there it can be some sort of handshake and predictability in that, then it's sure an easier road for everyone instead of it being automatically antagonistic.
Yeah. And, well, I don't want to dwell on it, but there are certain people who do like high density places. When my wife and I moved here, we didn't have any kids, so downtown was at least attractive to us, except for the pricing was much higher than buying a house outright, which was surprising to me, but in retrospect, it shouldn't have been. But because downtown Albuquerque isn't exactly the hot spot, it's not downtown Washington, D.C., it's not downtown New York, even when things were a little bit better off than it was before. And I just think that if I do think that crime up and down Central, because that's the other area.
Oh,
The
I don't
Nob Hill
disagree. Yeah.
area is also an area where a lot of young people would like to be and live. That you just struggle to provide the amenities and the safe lifestyle that you want. It's anyway, it's a challenge, but I do want to talk about kind of the current state of play. Obviously, in my estimation, the city of Albuquerque under Keller has moved politically to the left, the more progressive side of things. Your organization is a business organization. You're not tied into any one political party, but you've fought battles over the years to against overregulation and against more big government schemes. And we just had an election, and I understand that NAIOP was at least part of that equation in pushing a little bit of a different direction. So talk about kind of where you see things and want to see things going in terms of city council and the mayorship itself. What problems do you think need to be dealt with? What would you like to see happen?
Well, I'd like to see a more open door handshake between the industry, and I'd like to see more predictability. There is lip service to predictability, but not really action in that sense. And the reason I talk about it that way is for years, in my 26 years, most of my members didn't want to get involved in politics. Mm-hmm. First of all, they knew that if they stepped up and argued about the IDO or the impact fees or the approval process, then they were a target. And if they needed a quick approval on things and they had followed all the rules and it just got stuck on someone's desk, that's part of what can be a real problem for someone standing up. Now, I talk sometimes with other associations, and they're facing the same thing. For instance, in the Restaurant Association, if a restaurateur gets too verbal about his frustrations with what's happening and how laws are being made or new taxes are being put on them, like they are on all businesses, then they are suddenly the victim of people outside with angry signs because their business is very visual, and they want the public walking in and out. That's not necessarily true of the kind of members that NAIOP has, because it's more, as I said, construction, office building kind of placement for where they do their business, banks, etc. But the thing that is, I think, the most frustrating is that sense that that's why they have associations. Mm-hmm. Is they are not going to stand up at a city council meeting. I am going to stand up at a city council meeting and be that voice for them. And to build those relationships is what slowly but surely, I think, got NAIOP better known, because we did become an advocacy group very strongly for the industry, for business, and across the board. And we had handshakes with all those other associations, including the Restaurant Association, including the Realtor Association, the home builders, the construction associations. It became really more and more important for our voice to be as strong as the homeowners, because we live in Albuquerque too. We are part of our neighborhood, but we're also part of the school system and the rest of that. And in that travel, in that trip of becoming more of a political association as well as an educational one for our members, it became important that we had a voice in city council. We had a voice in county commission. And now we're having more of a voice in the legislature, in the state legislature, because they are beginning to take on those kinds of mandates and rules and regulations that before would have been handled on more of a local level. Mm-hmm. For instance, a law was passed at the last, a regulation was passed in this last legislature that local groups could decide how to handle their air quality mandates in neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. And it meant that no longer would it be the predictable thing where we followed the national rules, but every city would have possibly different rules. Mm-hmm. And also, my members began to move outside the state. They do projects and have offices in Texas, in Colorado, in Arizona, even as far afield as Florida and Georgia, across the Southwest.
Your members, define who those people are, not specifically, but generally.
Well, it's developers, yes. Okay. It's also architects who are now doing work all over the West. Excuse me. It's construction companies that have offices now, again, in the surrounding areas, surrounding states. And it's really across the board in terms of that. It's even utility companies that are working on high projects out in Georgia. That was one that I was thinking of that's a nuclear project. Mm-hmm. Okay. So it's really they and the difference in what they encounter when they walk into the city council is a totally different acceptance than here. Right. It is not adversarial. Mm-hmm. There's just excitement. They're coming to town to build a building.
Right. Well, but after kind of a big shift to the more progressive left, it does seem that Albuquerque is moving a little bit. We're kind of midway through this election cycle because we saw two more market-based, conservative-oriented counselors on the west side of Albuquerque, Dan Lewis and Luis Sanchez, win, and then we have these runoffs. But also, school board locally saw a shift. Now, would it be correct to say that NAIOP has played a role in trying to facilitate that shift?
Well, we have a PAC, mm-hmm. and PACs are separate from the association, so they make their own decisions. But they all obviously listen to the members, and the mm-hmm. members sit on those boards. But absolutely, yes. And we did something this year that I think was smarter for the industry. In the past, we have often, we're not a massive organization mm-hmm. with lots of money. So we really targeted things this year. And we were actually one of the only associations that got directly involved in the school board as well. In the past, we have done so with certain people, but this was a grassroots effort up from the membership. It wasn't initiated by the PAC, who did indeed initiate working with several other organizations as part of a group that you would know as HELP, right? Mm-hmm. The
Healthy economy leads to progress. Yes.
Right, thank you.
Acronyms, bane of my existence.
And we worked with them and donated money there, but we also donated directly. And we supported those, and we had events. We had a large event in August with 9 city council candidates. We chose 2 from each of the 5 districts, and that was only 9 because one was running with no opposition. And so we definitely concentrated on city council. It's of large importance to how we can function as business people in an environment that doesn't automatically support businesses or recognize what it takes to build a building. I'd love to do a class sometimes with all of the heads of the associations, the neighborhood associations, just to take them from beginning to end of what it means to do an office building, an industrial warehouse, a shopping center, anything. What do you have to do, starting at dirt, and finding dirt in Albuquerque is getting harder and harder because. We're surrounded by Native American land. We're surrounded by federal land. It's very hard to expand into a large entity. There's only really two large areas that can do a combination of commercial and multifamily, and that's Mesa del Sol and Santa Elena. And that's going to fill up if we're able to retain our kids here and build a stronger and bigger city. But I think it would be fascinating for them just to see the hoops that you jump through and the cost. And developing is a little bit like gambling because the world can change in a moment.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like maybe you have a future role with NAIOP to be your to teach your classes on hoops 101 with Lynne Andersen. It sounds like it's ready to go. Before I let you go, actually, and you are you're ending your role currently as the president at the end of this calendar year, right?
That's correct.
Okay. And do you, and I know this is a sensitive subject, but you want to give your successor all the positive opportunities they can, but you have such a long track record. You have a history in our city and to an extent our state. Do you think that NAIOP will continue to perform the role that it has in the future? Do you see this succeeding because you have such a unique set of skills and what you've brought to the city over the last 25, 26 years? Can it continue? I mean, nobody could really truly fill your role. I hate to break it to you, but there's no other Lynne Andersen sitting out there just waiting. So I want you to try to be candid as possible on that. Is it just the business, the groups that are going to help push the organization forward, or
no? It'll be the members. NAIOP is a member-driven organization. It really is. People jump in and they commit their time and effort, and they want it to succeed. And when you want it to succeed, and you have that strong underbase of people that are volunteers. For instance, you asked me what was I proudest of this year. I was proudest of our seminar. We had an incredible seminar, and it was looking at 2022, 25 speakers. Wow. And it was mostly members talking about what they knew and understand. It was intermixed with a lot of other people. Raul Torres talking about his new legislation coming up in 2022 on crime to try and keep more people from being released automatically. And so it was across many sectors in terms of that. AED was there talking about how they function and how it's so important and for them to work closely with developers and with the business, the commercial real estate world. But the new person, Rhiannon Samuel, is smart. She's young. She's got a lot of energy, and I don't anymore. It's time that new blood came in and younger blood is there. And, we have a section of NAIOP called the Developing Leaders, and I know you're in a hurry here, but it's people 35 and under. And it's surprising how many of them are children of existing business owners that are involved in commercial real estate. It's an industry that attracts those kind of entrepreneurial brains that get involved in all of this and come up with great ideas, either as architects or engineers. Engineers are one of our strongest components, and they bring all of this new information on the tech side of how buildings are changing. And it's fascinating to watch that interaction with them. They have their own group, they run their own council, and their favorite thing is brew pubs. So they do after work get-togethers and intermix in that environment. It's going to be fun to see them all come together and build. I mean, I'm really excited for that age group. You know, the millennials get a lot of bad press, but the millennials I work with in this industry are just as focused and hardworking as in some cases, their parents, in some cases, just because they fell into this world for whatever reason and fell in love with it.
All right. Well, before I let you go, what does the future hold for you aside from potentially teaching developers classes on how to how to deal with the bureaucracy and getting a building from dirt to completion? What, you got any travel plans or other exciting opportunities out there for Lynne Andersen?
You know, at this point, I'm just planning not to be on anybody's schedule, and to do what we want to do in the morning when we wake up. But I would also emphasize that we're New Mexicans. I mean, I'm by adoption, but when everyone's talking about the 12th generation, you know, the politicians that are running in the third or the fifth or the 100th or whatever. I always think back one political person I know who said, you know, I got here as soon as I could, guys. And that's the way I feel about it. And I'm just going to enjoy rediscovering all the parts of New Mexico I love.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and for all of your service to Albuquerque and the city and the state as well over the years. And thank you for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to this show at Apple, Stitcher, or have your Google Home play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.